This is Radio Free Zion.
I was fascinated by the Elizabeth Holmes stuff, and I started reading a bunch of stuff about voice and like the what are you doing?
The Elizabeth Holmes face.
The Elizabeth Holmes stuff is crazy. Like she had people. One of the whistleblowers, I didn't realize this. One of the whistleblowers was his grandpa was a big investor in Elizabeth Holmes or in Theranos.
Yeah.
And like his grandpa basically disowned the grandson to like side with Elizabeth Holmes. Like,
Wow.
Obviously a lot of crazy stuff happening, but as far as persuasion goes, like she was doing something special there.
I mean, it's the idea that the thing that particularly pissed me off is she got a husky that was named after the famous husky that had delivered some vaccines or something.
Oh, really?
And like jokingly referred to it as a wolf because huskies are barely pets. Like they're sort of semi-feral creatures that will like live alongside you and eat all your AirPods. Which is the real reason that we have the improvement in our headphones is Fenrir ate like
all the
AirPods in the house. But naming your husky after the most famous husky is you're not trying to pass it off as a wolf. And there was a bunch of press stories.
So you were frustrated because
I was frustrated
she admitted that it was a dog?
No. I was frustrated that she in passing was like, yeah, that's the wolf. And then the journalist made it a whole story of Elizabeth Holmes is a fraud about her dog. And they like tried to spin the like fraud story of it's not actually a wolf, it's a husky. And I'm like, their frame was so strong that it completely blinded them to any nuance in truth. Like huskies are pretty wolfy. Like they, like Fenrir's got like 2.6% wolf DNA or whatever. And
so were you frustrated at Elizabeth
I'm
Warren
frustrated
that she contaminated the narrative of the notion that the dog that you now have is not a wolf? Or were you frustrated with the journalists for
helped me
failing to see the nuance that
it helped me see how the journalists
are
are so intent and on destruction of this character.
The narrative was already written before they did any analysis into,
of course,
to what extent
it's just what's the
dog
thing we
was
can
the
do
wolf.
that can make what's the thing we can do that can give us the headline or the soundbite today of Elizabeth Holmes is a liar. It's just, I don't know. That was one point of frustration. I think
was that wasn't like the thing that you first, that wasn't like the first Dunning-Kruger red pill.
Oh no. No. I mean, it goes like
you were already on that path.
It was interesting because I remember I studied anthropology in college, and I remember one of my professors had been doing a bunch of research around the like Mesa Verde and the cliff dwelling folks, and the Anasazi Pueblo folks in southwestern America. And when some major news organization had reported on his research, they were talking about cannibalism and witchcraft and just completely blowing all nuance out of the way. And and I remember, and maybe it was even some who's the linguist at MIT that is famous? He's a famous leftist. Noam Chomsky.
Yeah. The only person who would describe Noam Chomsky as a linguist at MIT.
He's, the semantic structure of knowledge and all these other things. Like, he had some important contributions back in the day. But it's semantic structure of knowledge.
Perfect insight into Connor's brain ever.
But yeah, the MIT linguist.
Who was the name of that German flautist in the 1940s?
Mozart.
Hitler. Oh, yeah.
He wasn't a flautist.
He was, wasn't he?
Did he?
I thought he played the flute.
When you have any kind of expertise and then you see the media report on the area of your expertise and you're like, this is completely bullshit. and then you realize every time I read anyone writing about some area of expertise.
Yeah, Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be some
I
bullshit.
recognize that, yeah. If I mean, that's...
But that's just particularly got me angry, because then I...
So Noam Chomsky tipped you off to that.
Maybe.
Interesting.
Maybe.
I'd be interested to know, like, if you could, like...
I mean, if I were going all the way back, I'd go back to, like, Neil Postman, amusing ourselves to death.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that, like, Brave New World is a more accurate threat analysis of our current state of civilization than 1984. And, yeah, like, Brave New World, everyone's in the feelies. It's like this totally dictatorial thing, but everyone's sort of oversaturated and hyperstimulated and, thinks it's a good thing. And...
I haven't read that one.
It's a really, really, really good one.
The thesis is basically
so
there's
the kids
too
are all
much
born
stimulation,
in labs.
so we don't pay attention to important stuff because
it's not that
we all need a dopamine fast.
So there's a one way you could create a dictatorship is make everything a vote and send people just a yellow phone book full of all the different things that they have to vote on.
Yeah, like
and
California.
And take advantage of the fact that no one's going to vote.
Right.
And,
so
or
like
no one's going to be able to be an informed voter. And so if you can,
basically, if you DDoS people with decision making, then they fail to make important decisions.
All right, this is our free association session of the podcast where we just go on a couple rides. But another one of my favorite books is The World Beyond Your Head by Matthew Crawford. And one of the things he talks about is the unholy alliance that is neoliberalism, where you have, Enlightenment liberalism says everything should be a choice. Like man should be a completely self-authoring, self-creating thing, and we should abolish all notion of like tradition or any sort of constraints, any constraint or bond you would have to your family, to your wife or your parents or your kids. Like everything is optional.
Well, is there like a level of moralism there, like
it's the belief that freedom is the only value, right? So so this would be like the liberal
side. So
side.
as long as you're not infringing upon somebody else's freedom,
you should be able to choose everything.
Go nuts,
right?
Okay.
And then on the other side of it, so this is the like philosophy, or this is the sort of like cultural underpinning that says like you choose your gender, you choose your like. Everyone can be a YouTube star if
everything
that's what you want
relative,
to be. Everything's relative. There isn't any sort of absolute moral order, right? Okay. And so then you can't have a cultural conversation about what it means to live a good life. And on the other side of it, so you have the left sort of tearing down all of the, he would call them cognitive jigs, and we can go into that with like what a jig is. But basically the attention scheme, all of the things that would sort of be the decisions that had been made for you by previous generations, those get torn down. And on the other side, capital rushes in to fill to create a sort of nudge style choice architecture. This was the big idea of the Obama administration, is we'll just use these sort of behavioral nudges to guide people towards doing the right thing. It's like you're being subtly psychologically nudged when you walk into a grocery store and there's one box of cereal that's sort of, more prominently placed than the others. It just makes it, the ground slopes towards you making certain decisions.
So but what means
the
government or
capital, right? So what he's talking about is that basically we're DDoSing people with decisions, and then capital sort of tries to nudge them towards making decisions that might not be in their interest but are in the interest of the capital. Okay. So that's sort of the state of the world under neoliberalism, is you have I just hate everything. That's the thing I've been wrestling with, is to keep taking us tangent on tangent. I've been listening to a bunch of Jordan Peterson, because I got into Carl Jung, and Jordan Peterson references a ton to Carl Jung, and I've enjoyed his analysis of it, and noticing that he has this thing, that the thing that gives people PTSD is when they experience malevolence, like people who are like willfully causing suffering on them or other people they care about. And it sort of like rocks their notion of, good and evil.
Your
And,
morality lens
and they're like,
shifts.
wow, they're bad, mean people in the world. Like, or they're people, and then but the hard thing is that you see that in yourself, and you see like the
So
sort of,
if people aren't de facto good, then I may not be de facto good.
and then especially when you can get bitter and resentful, and then you see the sort of like, and if you can't integrate the darkness inside yourself, you're either just going to be resentful and naive, and or you can go really dark. So that's
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this recently, like, and specifically in the context of
would
Silicon
you do
Valley.
the Elizabeth Warren thing?
Right.
In that
given the right
situation,
set of incentives.
given the right set
you
of
might.
setups, you might.
Yeah, I was talking about this with somebody. I can't even remember who. But I kind of showed up in Silicon Valley believing enough in the notion that people were optimizing for their long-term good and relationships matter. And I think that's, broadly true in Silicon Valley. But as you kind of get, frankly, as you rise up the levels in Silicon Valley and as you see more into the weeds, you realize that it's far more nuanced and complex than that, right? There are even, not that this is good or evil necessarily, but, some of the people that are strongest in the, founder should control the company, they're at times the same ones being like, all right, founder, if you don't take this company public because I need a return, I'm going to fire you. Yeah. Like, it's not. So I guess my journey of the past 4 or 5 years was like one of a ton of naivete and like, this is an amazing place. And then you kind of start to see the dark side of it a little bit. Yeah. Not even dark necessarily, but like more complex than I had assumed. And now it's at the point where, and, so for a while I like had this sorting function in my mind of like, oh, person X is good, person Y is bad. And the purpose of, when you're raising money is to talk to all of the people who've worked with that person in the past so you can sort them cleanly into that binary box. And then over time you realize like, no, actually every individual person, when faced with a different set of incentives and making different choices, right, will act differently in different circumstances. So you have to actually understand as much nuance as you can about every individual. And like, there's some of it, I guess, is kind of the never meet your heroes thing. Like you meet the people that you just respected the hell out of and you realize like they're flawed. Mm-hmm. And I think I have to be careful to not be like, oh, that, that person's an idiot or that person's an asshole or whatever. Like you have to weigh that against, like, there's still, like, I don't know, I think we're losing the ability to have that nuance in like a personal relation. So it's like, it was Steve Jobs, a jerk, or was he a genius? It's like, well, he's totally both. Yeah. And at different times, different levels of each.
And you are too, right?
Totally.
Like it's being able to, you can't see the light and darkness in other people if you can't see the light and darkness inside yourself too.
Totally.
I think, you were talking about incentives, and I've been on this kick of the world is already governed by unfriendly artificial general intelligence, and it is these incentive setups of social media trying to optimize for the most likes, and the system doesn't care whether you're the tweet that gets the most likes. It's going to, the algorithms are going to put the thing that gets the most likes into the public consciousness, and democracy is sort of just a more blown up version of, it's more complicated, but it's a more blown up version of social media, as we've seen from the last few elections. And capitalism is like, well, if you're not the one who's going to take the company public, then we're going to find somebody else who will take the company public. If you won't slot yourself into the maximum capital,
the market is demanding X and you're not X right now. So we're going to find X.
We'll find some other X. And the thing that I think is important about human choice and keeping humans having power in the mix is that you can make moral trade-offs. That you can say, actually, I'm not going to be optimizing for the most money or the most popularity right now. There is a higher good that I can aim for, and I can choose not to do that. And you're sort of you can end up struggling against one of these incentive systems. Like the best, one of my favorite essays of all time is the Meditations on Molok, which is Molok is this, god in Carthage when there were the Punic Wars between Carthage and Rome, and parents would offer their infant sons to this fiery idol of this cow-headed god, and they would burn their kids alive in order to get victory in war. And Molok, there's a beautiful Howl is this great poem by Allen Ginsberg, and he's sort of setting up Molok as a description of the system. No one wants to pave paradise for a parking lot, but like Molok does. And so I loved this essay because it was tying in these ideas with a particular incentive setup, which is an arms race, basically a race to the bottom type scenario where you can improve your relative personal local condition by defecting against the common good, right? So if, there's a bunch of people living besides a lake, at a bunch of factories or something, and one of them can benefit by polluting the lake, and it hurts everybody else a little bit, but it gives them some relative local rise. Eventually everybody ends up polluting the lake, even though everyone ends up in a worse off situation, but the relative power keeps stabilizing and just making the globe worse. And that's evil, right? There are shapes. This could lead into some of the other timeless stuff that I wanted to talk about, but it's not that energy and matter are the only fundamental things in the universe. There's math. Math isn't like, I hit my mic. It's not matter or energy, but it is sort of the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry. Like, they exist before the things which the laws of chemistry exist when there's only hydrogen, helium in the earth or in the world. When there's just stars and there's no carbon. There's the laws that govern how carbon's going to behave are still sort of waiting to find some way to manifest themselves in the world, right? Like the concept 2 + 2 = 4 exists before there's a mind or a calculator that can run that calculation. So if you think about the sort of fundamental components of the universe, you've got these patterns too, and some of these patterns are patterns like Molok, where there's like they make the world worse for living conscious things. So it's, evil is timeless. And the question is, are you going to
will you succumb
be
to
an
that?
agent? Yeah. Are you going to be an agent that will give that, wickedness a way of manifesting itself in the world or not? Or, you can also do things that are hard and difficult, but allow some goodness to flow into the world. And we are the universe's way of realizing itself. So, yeah.
Sure.
That's anyways, relates to your
I don't remember where we started with that.
Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
Started. Elizabeth Warren, Elizabeth Warren's voice, Elizabeth Warren's dog, Dunning-Kruger effect,
Elizabeth
Noam
Holmes'
Chomsky. Elizabeth Holmes' dog. Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm mixing up my evil Elizabeth. Just kidding. Not really, though.
But we all have an evil
we all have
Elizabeth
that evil
inside
in
us.
That's the moral of the story is...
All right, well, maybe we'll throw another timeless thing in here, and then we can go back to some timeless.
We'll start with this, and then we'll go into whatever we go into.
So my favorite, one of my favorite ideas I've come across in the last 10 years or so is the idea that our brains our neurons are basically single-celled organisms that just want to be connected to some like wire, like they need to have charge to sort of stay alive. So the thing which allows us to learn, the thing which gives us neuroplasticity, is the idea that there's basically these feral single-celled organisms that live in your head, and you conceive of yourself as sort of having a little Austen behind your brain, but actually there's this whole economy of neurons that want to get hooked up to thoughts that are going to get thought again, or
so they're each acting in their own
self-interest,
tiny self-interest.
Yep.
And net that creates thought.
And it also means that there can be, agency. Like we think of agency as this very human thing of, we're goal directed. We can perceive things in the world to try to get our needs met, or like to advance.
But how does that work if each neuron is just like?
Well, so you could think about it like
it's kind of pre-programmed, right?
I've had this experience because I got addicted to nicotine.
Okay.
Right. Is that first some neurons get wired up that are activated when, nicotine is sent through them. And there's a pattern that gets manifest in these neurons that says, hey, like, go have a cigarette, go, chew some nicotine gum or whatever. Mm-hmm. Right. And the more there's a saying like energy flows where attention goes sort of thing. And it's just that, or another saying is the neurons that fire together wire together.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time I remember chewing nicotine gum, I was trying to hack this system to get myself addicted to working out. So I would chew nicotine gum
and work out. And you're Pavlovian trying to like, I really like working out because that makes me feel like nicotine.
And then I would try to extend that into, I really like, doing design work.
So pretty soon you're just like
and then I'm pretty
doing
soon
nicotine all day.
Pretty soon it fires and wires with everything.
Yeah.
And then it ends up taking over some of these decision making.
So it's like Pavlov, but the bell's just ringing all day.
Yeah, it's just like
unlimited food.
Because you're both the dog and you're the bell, and
right.
You're the guy ringing the bell, and then suddenly the dog is ringing the bell just whenever he wants.
I've actually never thought about this. Does Pavlovian theory still work if like how the placebo effect can still work in some instances, even if people understand that they're taking the placebo? Like it's that strong. There's
confounding factors with the whole placebo effect, because a lot of times the people who are signing up for the placebo trials, that's
a whole other
there's there was a time, because I had heard that the placebo effect works more basically the more sort of cultural psychological structure is put into it. So you would recover, you'd get higher results from a placebo injection than from a placebo pill. You'd get even better results from a sham surgery where you got sedated, they told you they did a surgery, and you would see way higher
so
healing
is that just
factors.
A function of like the level of believability that
and the rewiring of your neurons. So this is why exorcism works, right? Is because if you end up having a bunch of neurons that have fired together that believe you're like hosting some archaic demon that is causing you, and your whole self narrative is set up on like, oh well, this is why I'm doing these evil things, is because I've got a demon in me. Clearly, like, look at the behavior that's happening. I'm reflecting on, I don't have a story of myself that allows me to do such kinds of wickedness. I must be possessed. And suddenly the whole culture supports this structure and says, be gone, foul spirit. That can actually allow people to have massive, like, those neurons stop firing with the same thing.
So it's a literal, like, medical, I don't know if
this is a materialist explanation
physical.
for exorcism,
sure.
Right? Whether it's totally true or not, I don't know. But
well, I mean, there's certainly
something crazy about belief, and
right.
Your body and your mind are not separate systems, right? Like you've got neurons in your gut and in your all throughout your hands and things, and there's something. There's
in ways that we don't fully understand yet. I mean, what's the what is it called when a soldier like loses their leg and then they feel their leg?
Yep.
Yeah, phantom limb. Yeah.
Yep.
So you have to use a mirror, and you can, if you see your muscles untense, you'll
Yeah,
your
exactly.
muscles will actually unclench.
Yeah.
Like it's real. So I guess my question was, if you understand that the bell is merely a Pavlovian, like, okay, I give myself food and the bell at the same time, do the neurons still wire in such a way that the bell still makes your mouth water?
I mean, my first thought would be something like, you're asking if like faith healing can work if you don't have faith. And my guess is probably not. Right? If the thing...
Well, it depends. Because it depends on like how exactly that connection is formed, right? Because the person who's...
If you have faith in...
If you have phantom limb, you understand that you don't have a limb, but if you're, seeing in a mirror that your leg is there, it's enough to trick some subconscious part of your brain into that. Yeah,
it's about how you can propagate beliefs throughout your conscious and your subconscious, right? There's things that you know that you don't know. Right. There's things that there's just like there's unknown unknowns and known unknowns. There's there's like unknown knowns. There's things that you know about your situation or yourself that you're afraid. This kind of gets into the whole sense making rationality stuff, right? There are things that you know are true, but if you acknowledge to yourself that they were true, like, could be something about your relationships, could be something about how things are going to work, right? And there are fictions that are sort of necessary to hold up your narrative of who you are and what's going on in your world, and things that if you acknowledged, you wouldn't be who you think you are, and it would be hard for you to continue having the kinds of relationships that you're having, and so we're really good at hiding things from ourselves. That's the whole notion of the unconscious and the subconscious, is that that you don't. What's the saying that it's hard to make somebody see something when their job depends on not seeing it, right? It's hard to like make Elizabeth Warren see Elon Musk as a productive member of society, just like it would be hard for us as entrepreneurs to see someone like Elon as like, there's probably some way in which he is freeloading, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
And like, it's hard for us to see that in our heart the same way it would be hard for someone whose whole last 40 years of a career is based on a story of, well, there's the capitalists and then there's the working class, and like clearly the only enemy of the people is those factory people, right? The factory owners are the only, like, there's no way that there could be wickedness or evil inside the Politburo, right? So, so yeah, it's just, it makes you. I've been thinking a lot about how do you bootstrap a collective intelligence, right? If we have this world that is being governed by these incentive gradients and these, like, the algorithms of clicks and likes and money and votes, and and it could be we keep nudging ourselves more and more in that direction as we advance machine learning, right, into this world that is just like, an AI isn't like a person, it's like a storm. It's a pattern in the world that is becoming, it's feeding off of its own power to become more powerful. I buy the AI threat. Like, it's not going to look like Terminator, but it'll look like a really bad hurricane that eats everything. And I don't want to see that happen. So I've been obsessed with the idea of collective intelligence and like, how can we get better at thinking as a society? So I was worried about pandemic risks in like 2008. I'd never even conceptualized the idea that the real danger would be, well, let me take a quick aside. In the Middle Ages, if the king was sick, they would do the craziest stuff to try. They would like boil his scalp and like pour tin on his head and like leeches and all these other things, because the last thing you wanted as a doctor was to be accused of not doing enough, of letting the king die without pulling out all the stops. And so they would, like, this is where the desire for like rhino horns and like, the most exotic,
even if there's a
expensive
possibility that it may lead to something.
Oh, they would definitely make things way worse. Like the interventions would very often be the thing which would kill, the monarch or the nobility or whatever. But the doctor at least couldn't be said to not be trying, and they would be trying things that really, if we would see today, we're clearly just making things way worse. But I hadn't, like, in my soul thought about how we would do this to ourselves in a way with, interventions that are become extremely important for people because they want to believe the government cares about whether or not grandma's going to die or whether or not they're going to get sick or, and so and there's this morality that gets attached to, oh, well, you have to wear a mask for the 10 seconds while you walk into the restaurant, even if you're going to take your mask off to then eat. Like, it's this,
because masks are good.
Because masks are good. And like, otherwise it might be a signal that you don't care about us.
Yeah.
You don't care about the sacrificing your comfort for the collective. And that this is where I'm thinking about, we could pull it up. The, that meme that is like, there's a fish and then there's like the fish stick that's shaped like a fish. And then there's a Swedish fish, and then there's Oreo that's Swedish fish flavored, right? It's like, the symbol has a reference to reality. The symbol has a reference only to itself. The symbol has no reference to another symbol. Reality,
the symbol
right?
is just, yeah.
And that, anyways, but the challenge was trying to, so my life's project as I've seen it, the story I've told to myself is that the world's getting exponentially more complicated because we are getting, Moore's law, we're getting more and more leverage over the universe. We're getting, through science and technology and these incredibly complex systems, we're able to do more as humans, but our ability to think well together and perceive reality and know what we're doing and react to surprise and coordinate around that, is it best static? We're still in this sort of like 1700s style of decision making for how to manage public policy, and our corporations are Fordian, like Henry Ford era kind of like management theories, and we haven't figured out how to do this collective intelligence thing nearly well enough to deal with the changing threat landscape of self-created threats through our affecting the environment. So anyways, yeah, but the challenge is that the things which are barriers to us being able to perceive the world often go like into your psyche, because you don't want to see things that are that jeopardize your status in the group, that jeopardize like whether it's
so
the,
you're
the,
saying
the self-blindness is so not just a problem of 140. You can't change it by going from 140 characters to 280 characters, right?
Right.
It's like, and that's been a thing that's been personally like.
So you're saying,
overwhelming for me.
If I'm dedicated to kind of truth making or truth finding in mass, right? Or
even
group
with yourself, even with other people.
Sure.
You kind of have to go kind of deep.
There's a fear that either incentives or self-belief or whatever that is so strong that it might not even work, basically.
There was I was drawn to the Bay Area rationalist world because there was, a bunch of people who gathered in the same space who were like, how do we perceive the world better? They were interested in this project, and for me, this is like basically a spiritual project. We are the universe. How do we see the universe? How do we make more truth manifest? And they had this concept of, well, you've got bugs. So you want to like go through your day and you want to figure out like what are the little ways. There was a personal productivity side to it of like, how do we just debug ourselves?
So you want to eliminate all of your flaws and biases.
What are the ways that you're standing in your own way? What are the ways that like a small intervention could like, you can never find matching socks. Okay, well, so why don't you just go out and buy 20 pairs of the same color socks, and then you have less of a problem of finding matching socks. Like there's simple bugs.
So
and then there's this
creating systems to
finding ways to
around
do interventions
your
and
weaknesses and flaws.
But one of the things they talked about that I liked is the idea of load-bearing bugs, and that's kind of this when you've got like a sort of deep-seated belief that the universe is giving you a lot of evidence that this isn't true anymore, right? Or this maybe it was never true, but in your like web, in your roam graph or whatever, that belief is underpinning a ton of other things that you're doing, and it is just a lot of emotional pain to propagate a change in that belief to all these other things. We will find ways to like not acknowledge that belief, that little node needs to get switched, because it would be so potential, like it would cause so much chaos into our life to change our mind. It's hard to change your mind. That's why people have to take friggin' ayahuasca and psychedelics or like, fast for 40 days and 40 nights. And, only a few people have done that. But
no, but I think, certainly, so, as you know, I grew up Mormon or LDS.
Great example.
And like when people leave the church, because they cease to believe in one aspect of it, and
they don't buy the boats.
Yeah, if you don't believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet because X is wrong, then as we're literally taught within the church that like, oh, Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon are the keystone of our religion, so if you take that out, the whole thing crumbles. Like it's not and that's you. So first of all, that's kind of the weakest, that's the easiest place to attack, and so that's usually where people like, if that falls down, your entire belief system gets shattered, right?
Yeah. And then you start.
But the interesting thing is like
the marriage that you've got.
Because
the relationship to your kids.
Totally. The way that you treat and believe your family, the way you wear clothes, what you do and don't drink or eat, what you like, the way you relate to your community, what you do on Sundays, like what you do and don't read. So like, it's interesting to watch. Most people maybe not most, but obviously if you're my age, let me take a step back. In my parents' generation, it was super, super rare for somebody to leave the church, right? You were so like, if you were in it for life. And if somebody left, it was like, whoa. Yeah. And now it's like, of the people I served a mission with, so that's like, you're hardcore, maybe 50% are still in the church. Yep. Like it's, it's much, it doesn't even phase you anymore to know someone who's left. But it's always interesting to watch like what path you go down when you leave the church, because your entire moral compass, you have to rebuild from scratch. Yep. Right. And so for some people that's like, I always joke about how, ex-Mormons are like, all right, I need to drink alcohol. And then they, as like a 25-year-old, you drink alcohol for the first time and it's like, oh, this sucks. Like I'm going to drink margaritas. Like, I grew up drinking soda. This doesn't taste good at all. Or even like coffee, right? Yeah. It's like, oh, give me the almond mocha with like 2 creams. When, you can tell when you're hanging out with an ex-Mormon and they're like, I can't even drink coffee. But beyond that, like, how do I feel about family? Because, families are eternal, kids are good, monogamous relationship. Like, where do you go there? Yeah. So I guess, like, it's interesting watching my friends recreate, like, it is a load-bearing wall, right? Yep. And if you knock that out, then basically everything, and I've even had friends be like, yeah, I don't believe in the church anymore. Like, okay, like, yeah, it's fine. What do you believe? Like, I don't know. Do I believe in Jesus now? Like, yeah, it was all so wrapped together that do I believe in God? I don't even know.
One of the most surprising things. So the last few weeks I went on this like Carl Jung kick, digging in deep. And he was saying that from 30 on, this guy was a, clinical psychotherapy, doing analytic therapy for decades and decades and decades. And he said that every person that he met, the only way that people got better and fixed their neuroses was by reconnecting with some form of religion, some form of
Interesting.
and that the ones who were not able to reconnect with like the fundamental religious impulse, and it didn't actually matter which religion it was the interesting thing. He had Jews and Catholics and Protestants, so I don't think he was treating a lot of like Hindus or Buddhists, but
sure.
Hinduism's interesting also because almost they have besides the Amish, the lowest recidivism, or like the lowest number of people leaving the church in America. It's like 89% of kids raised Hindu stay Hindu. But, and I think it could be because we basically we already live in a polytheistic society now,
Sure.
right? And so it's a little bit more amenable.
Well, it's like, yeah, I mean, when I was on a mission, you'd see like a Hare Krishna, you'd be like, yeah, we believe in Jesus. And they're like, awesome, us too.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it's no challenge.
okay.
Yeah. and in a world where you have, this.
Yeah.
This,
I just accept it all. We're good.
Yeah.
Like I've got.
Yeah. It's helpful.
There's not a temptation there's not like a very clear reason to pick one specific path, right? Or to like say,
but there's still,
I select X and I don't select Y.
And there's still a structure. There's still, they're able to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, or rather throw the entire bathroom out because there was a bug in the bath.
Sure.
Or something like this.
Sure.
But yeah, I just found it pretty interesting that he found that.
So only religion, huh? So
that's the answer to all your therapy problems. It's like you got to find God because it gives people some notion of some way to deal with the fundamental truth that life has a lot of suffering in it, and maybe is and it gives them a way of making meaning, and yeah, like.
So does that mean? Is that because like we're not smart enough rationally to be able to like cope with things or to change our minds, or is that?
Well, I mean, the religious impulse is now like
it's just like a hack.
It's
to
everywhere, right? I mean, if you look at, for instance, this social justice, right? So
right.
like,
so would modern day politics be able to serve that same purpose for Jung?
Everything after Nietzsche, right? So when Nietzsche's talking about like, we've killed God and
is
we'll
dead.
never get rid of the blood that has drenched us for like we're holding the knives. Mm-hmm. The thing he was supposedly worried about is that in trying to step in to take the place of God, like look at all of the sort of, ideologies that arose in the 20th
What's
century.
What's going to fill the God-shaped hole that
and
exists?
it is the belief that humans can create, the kingdom of God or a place of equity and equality and abundance and like the whole progress narrative that is America, which is that things can get better, mm-hmm. right? And they've, we don't have this cyclic history version. We have this Abrahamic notion that like there's linear time,
continual improvement,
and continual improvement. The arc,
forever,
it bends towards justice.
Yeah,
right. The arc of history bends towards justice, and whether we're doing it through science and technology and sort of creating a paradise of 3D printed 5-course meals, like that, there's this notion that if we can just give everyone everything, then there won't be jealousy and there won't be anger and there won't be hate, and we can get to a world where we've eradicated hate as a concept. We can, if we just crack down on hate speech, then we can crack down on hate thought, and like then we'll just all be this loving, what's the term they've got, the gay space communism,
luxury, fully automated luxury communism. Is that the one?
Yeah, the one I heard was a little bit further, which was fully automated luxury gay space communism. was the real,
I like yours better. Mine's a little more politically correct, but
this was from the left. This was not one that like, this is rainbow flags and spaceships. Like this is actually you can find every community on the internet, and there's a community of people who want fully automated luxury gay space communism, because then, we're all just fucking and sucking and like 3D printing our amazing bliss machines. Yeah. And that is a stand-in for God, right? And then when when you can create a totalitarian, totalitarian just means all encompassing. It's the personalist political. It's it doesn't, there's a difference between authoritarianism and totalitarianism, but they go kind of hand in hand, because if you think that there's one system that's going to have every conceivable answer for how humans should order themselves to create heaven, then
you got to go all in.
You go all in on that.
Yeah.
And and when you think that that is something that can be imposed from without, and that you can sort of convert people by the sword, then
then
Islam did
the
pretty
end justifies the means, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
Go for it.
And that's, so I would say that politics is stepped in for God for a lot of folks. But you can still get that crazy cognitive dissonance if you're a Stalinist and the 5-year plans aren't working, but your whole psychological framework is based around Stalin as our glorious leader who's going to, bring about the glorious revolution that will liberate the working classes, and people are starving all around you and your life is miserable. Then you either have to blind yourself to the reality that you're experiencing and not be able to sort of propagate fully into your belief structure, or you just end up lying to yourself.
Yeah.
So, but we have the same as,
like
folks who believe in
what
technology,
is that for me?
believing in
Right.
technology, right? Believing that, like, this is where I've often reflected on, because my motivating narrative is, well, it's a science-driven one. It's that if we can figure out how to better perceive the truth together, and we can go chase after it, we can create abundance for everyone, and we can spend our lives pondering the mysteries of the universe and just making things more awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a Lego world. Everything is awesome, kind of.
Right.
But yeah, like, that's also the sort of story in the Tower of Babel of, everyone comes together and says, look how great we are. We'll build a tower to heaven, and we're going to, like, bang down the doors of heaven. And God just sends confusion and says, well, actually, no, you can't speak to each other anymore. And like, that does seem like what happens on Twitter a lot, is that we become unable to communicate. And that is one of the things which prevents, progress as a civilization, is that people become... My favorite idea from René Girard is that the 10 Commandments are written backwards. That basically, like, the thing that you first experience that causes you to go down the path of eventually replacing God, right, and killing and stealing and all these other things, is you first covet, right? Even
Sure.
And this is, I'm thinking about. Did you ever see the movie Enemy at the Gates?
Mm-mm.
It's a great movie about snipers in Stalingrad. It's
Okay.
a bunch of Soviet snipers, right? And spoiler alert, like, there's this, love triangle drama that happens, and one of the, like, sort of communist, like, political guys, he's like a propagandist that is there, realizes that you can't build a society where where everything's equal, because he still wanted some girl who was in love with the sniper guy. Right. There's always
so
going
there's still
to be,
some zero-sum trade-off.
There's always
Somebody's
going to be
win,
some place.
somebody's going to lose.
Yeah. And
therefore, I'm going to rebel against communism, kind of thing. Or
Well,
does it go that far, or does he just lose faith?
he sacrifices his life for something. But, like, he sort of, because he interprets it as a moral failing within himself, that, like, I'm not good enough for communism, and also communism isn't good enough for me. Like, it's not going to solve this thing. But I think that's kind of the Girardian notion, is that people start off imitating one another, then they end up, like, desiring the thing. We want something because somebody else has it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And whether that's fame or recognition or resources or whatever, right? We start off envious, or we start off imitating because we're like, oh, that's my hero, I want to be like them. Then we're like, why should they have the nice thing and I don't have the nice thing? Or why should they get all the, press or credit or all this stuff and I don't? And then that selfishness that comes out of imitation creates rivalry, and then they end up, you have a society that just tears itself apart. The Girard notion is that Christianity is special because you're told to imitate Christ, who is imitating God. So it's like, which is,
seek perfection, good luck, kind of like.
Not so much, right? Because, like, Jesus isn't, even even on the cross, Jesus is doubting, right? I think that's the sort of powerful moment when he's like, Father, why have you forsaken me? It's like, even like the notion of doubt, I think, and this is another thing I've been
the Mormon interpretation of that is different, actually.
I think it's this is a relatively new interpretation even for me, and it's coming out of reading this Jungian stuff, which is that, like, if you fully believed all the way down deep in your soul, like, and it actually, like, belief is not, it's not about a set of propositions. I think one of the things that is, or an idea that I'm coming to and liking, is that religion has the game got set up as like, oh, a belief system is just a set of claims that you have to say are true, right? And religion is way older than this notion of propositional truth that is actually like a more modern and Enlightenment era invention, right? Religion's like, I had someone who was visiting the house who was a convert to Judaism, and I was like, but like, how do you do you believe all this stuff? He's like, no, Jews don't have to believe anything. This is a Christian way of thinking about religion. I just do. I just observe the Sabbath and do these things, and like, belief has nothing to do with it. I live. And it is but there's something where there's propositional knowing, and then there's knowing what, and there's knowing how. And if belief is really about living out things that are deeply subconsciously hard to do, like not trying to covet other people's things, or like not, like, if it's trying to actually live in a way where you are seeking the goodness of the world, you are willing to sacrifice your own limited beliefs in order to perceive truth as it comes in, right? You're willing to carry your cross, you're willing to sacrifice your, like, thinking is great. Our thoughts can die so we don't have to, right? But it's still a ton of work to, like, say, I'm going to let this thought die, and I'm going to keep going. But if belief is about continuously doing that, or like, then it's not just, did ancient Jews sail to America? Like, is the Garden of Eden in Jackson County, Missouri? My only understanding of the Book of Mormon is from the musical. So, like, all of my references to the Mormon faith are going to be, does God live on a planet called Xenos? Like, but it's not about those propositional things. It's, can you live like Jesus
Kolob,
did?
I think Xenos is Scientology, isn't it?
What's the...
Kolob.
Wait, is it...
Kolob. K-O-L-O-B.
Awesome. Yeah, great.
Anyway, doesn't matter.
But like, it's, yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter. It's like, can you live like Jesus did? Can you follow? Because Jesus wasn't like the modern sort of, spiritual gurus will say, like, you have to be yourself, right? And Jesus says, well, no, you just have to be like me. But there is another. This is the thing I've been digging with Jung, is like, being like me doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a carpenter from 2,000 years ago, right? Like, imitating Christ is in a sense like finding a way to, like, live truth, and be and live love, and be like kindness and mercy and forgiveness in the world that is, like, not merciful, not kind, like, not interested in truth, is interested in rising. Like, you have to be willing to say no to Satan when he puts you on top of the temple and says, everyone will bow to you if you just bow to me, right? Like, that's imitating Christ is not just about, you're not being told to just be yourself. You're told, like, there is something to imitate, but it's also something you can't imitate without being yourself in a weird way.
That actually aligns really well with the Mormon interpretation of, like, the purpose of life, right? Basically, the Mormon version is, there's a famous sermon from, this is kind of like...
Let me grab my nightmare fuel.
Very good. So this isn't like the first thing that you'll be taught if you investigate Mormonism, but basically the entire thesis of Mormonism, I guess, at the end of the day, is that, like, basically God and Jesus, well, I guess God specifically, used to be like us, but then he perfected himself, and so our goal is to basically do the same thing. And that's why in the Book of Mormon it jokes about everybody's going to become a god. Like, the goal is, like, self-perfection but like not, depending on how far you carry that or extrapolate that, like in your own way to some degree, like you become the perfected version of what you are supposed to be effectively. Anyway, the other interesting mental model that I've come across in that line of, what is belief and why do we believe was, when I was in Ukraine and we were talking to religious people all day, the kind of the former Soviet, or I guess Russian Orthodox version of faith is less like, it's not necessarily about belief in the like American Protestant Christian way. Like, so, I guess the Judaism version is, no, I just act and doesn't, I don't have to like believe. But
to actually act is to believe.
Is it?
Like, I like this William James's belief is willingness to take irrevocable action.
Sure.
Right.
But
and it's belief is embodied, not just propositional. Oh yeah, I can say this.
Like,
this,
I've convinced myself that X is true. It's like I'm actually doing Y, therefore I believe.
Yeah.
The Russian Orthodox version, and this isn't true for everybody, of course, but it's more nationalistic, for lack of a better term to describe it. So like, one guy was like, I don't know why you're from, you Americans are trying to talk to us about religion. Like, we're obviously, Russian Orthodox. And I was like, well, what if you're wrong? He's like, what do you mean, what if I'm wrong? Nobody cares who's right or wrong. Like, it's just like, I was born here. I'm Russian Orthodox. Like, that's how it works. Like the same way, I am a Springville Red Devil. I don't think Springville High School is better than Provo High School. It just doesn't matter. It's just like, that's where you were born. That's the lot you were given. That's what it is. And like, for me, it was one of those like, oh, I didn't like, for him, for me growing up Mormon, like religion is a process of, oh, you need to like analyze everything, determine for yourself what is true.
You need to choose from this
and
menu
that's like
of labels. Which of
that's
these labels,
the founding narrative of like, all right, go out and, think
Go to
about
the
all
Chinese
the churches and then you will discover that this is the one that is true. Right.
Yeah.
Which actually is it's a pretty compelling, like it works for conversion because it makes it encourages discovery and like, I'm going to be honest with myself in all of this. And like, as an individual, I will analyze and I will come to a conclusion about like, and that's, that's a very Western American, like that's how we do things, right? It's almost rational. It's not quite rationalism, but it's like
if you cut your soul off at your neck and said, my soul only exists between my chin and the top of my head.
Yeah.
And I don't need to, it's funny because as someone who's put so much of their life into something that is about, because I do believe that the progress of civilization is about the ability for us to some extent, externalize our representations of the world, right? Like, powerful ideas need to be somehow put into the environment. And if you can get them outside of your head and into some medium, powerful ideas require a medium for expressing them, right? And so, vector calculus or like, like the squiggles that Feynman diagrams for, the physics shit that Feynman was doing, right? Mm-hmm. Those are mediums for expressing powerful ideas. And, like there's a story about someone came into Feynman's office and there were like papers all over this. And he was like, oh, that's where you recorded your thinking. He's like, no, that's where my thinking happened. It happened on the page. Mm-hmm. So with Rome, like my project has been about, if you can get your ideas outside of your head, if you can put them into some sort of structure that actually is a better medium for representing certain kinds of ideas, then you can think thoughts that were just like, there's things you can't see without a microscope, things you can't hear without sonar or whatever. Like, there are thoughts you can't think without a better medium for thinking them. Mm-hmm. And so, but I've been wrestling a lot with the kinds of things which are true that aren't just propositional, right? Mm-hmm. That aren't just, and the kind of thinking that is not just verbal or linguistic. And anyway, so it's my trying to deal with my trying to integrate myself and be like, okay, what's the part of the world that I'm not looking at? Because I've over specialized in this stuff that's between my chin and my top of my head, right? So that's and it's like the meditation stuff that's the embodied. Like Plato was a wrestler, you know, like those guys lived in their bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's gnarly, man.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I went down this path of like, you know, like hypnosis is still a topic that is fascinating to me. Like, you know, the division of, you know, conscious and subconscious, or, you know, every philosopher has different words for it. And
That's why late night TV is so dangerous.
Why is that?
When you're like tired, you're more susceptible to hypnosis. Something like 30% of the population is extremely susceptible to hypnosis. And if you think about it,
so your rational mind's turned off, and whatever you hear is just,
and it's just going straight into your subconscious,
through.
And it ends up being stuff that you can't fully examine. And you just sort of, it's like half of, all right, not to politicize things too much, but it's like my parents love MSNBC. And they watch it all the time.
That's right. I've got a Fox News dad. Same thing.
But it's fascinating that there was a study that the New York Times did, and it was something like 70% of folks who watch, you know, the liberal news think that you have between a 20 and a 50% chance of getting hospitalized if you get COVID. When in reality, it's like, you know, depending on pre-existing conditions and whether you're over 80, it's like between 1 and 5%. If you're healthy, it's like nowhere near that.
Yeah.
But when you realize, like, I think they actually just said across Democratic voters, it was, with Republicans, it's still an order of magnitude, above what the risk actually is.
Oh, really? Republicans are still above.
They're still like they still think there's just like a 10% chance.
That tail risk is, you're always going to overestimate the tiny tail risk.
Or you're always going to overestimate it when all of these
when everybody's
TVs
talking about it
and
all
radio
the time.
and everything is talking about it all the time. It's just like people are, you know, like more worried about.
We're not
death.
that analytical. Yeah.
Yeah, we're especially not good at dealing with separating narratives from statistically
enormous or tiny numbers, especially. Yeah.
And so we think we have our sense making system is based on, you know, it's still a mass media one where it's like a large number of people give a small few power centers a lot of attention to tell them what's going on in the world. And when those power centers are exaggerating because it gets them more eyeballs, because it's like, I think it was a similar thing. There was a study of, and I know I'm only going on, you know, one side of the political spectrum here, but like it applies all over the place. But folks who were associated with Black Lives Matter thought that there were like 10,000 unarmed black people getting shot per year by police, when it was like between 10 and 50, you know, or like, I think the number was 15.
Yeah. So just that the narrative is so powerful that it distorts views of reality.
And numbers are not especially large numbers and statistically.
Yeah. And especially like, when you're talking about on the scale of like US citizens, right?
Yeah.
I remember when I was younger, anything above $1 million was the same to me. It was just like, it was just a lot. It was just so much that you can't even think of it, you know? And now, you know, I'll see a company sell for 500 million and then a company raise at a $2 billion valuation. Those are super different, like tangible things for me now.
Yeah.
In a way that when I was 18, it's just like, oh, that's just so much money. Like it just doesn't matter. Right.
Yeah. Well, because now you're thinking
and
about
now,
it
like,
differently, because now you're not
now
thinking
I know
about
I have a
what you can
representation
buy.
of what $1 billion means in a way that I didn't before.
And I think one of the big things is that when you're like, my first jobs were construction, and I was so pumped to make $20 an hour when I was working overtime. Yeah. Right. Because the things that I was imagining were consumables. My whole point of reference for what money meant was, how many hours do I have to trade to get this motorcycle?
Right.
You know, or like, how many hours do I have to trade to be able to pay rent for this month? Right. And when your frame shifts dramatically when you start creating companies, because you're like, okay, how many other people can I allow to dedicate their lives to this project and put food on the table? And like, your point of reference is no longer about yourself. It's about how big a team you can build in order to go do the thing that requires many people to do. What kind of, you know, can we build a factory? Can we
what kind of opportunity am I given by the means of the money that I have in order to
direct
do
attention
cool stuff? Yeah, totally.
To direct attention,
totally,
or to open up an affordance for other people who want to do
by other people's time and effort and energy, and not even
And the most I think this goes back to the whole. One of the things I've been reflecting on a bunch is the ways in which I attribute the worst motivations to other people and the best motivations to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right, where it's one of the reasons that we've been working on end-to-end encryption for Rome is I don't want the power that Google has to read all of your Google Docs, read all your Gmail, and use that to control what ads they're putting in or any of this. I think I want privacy.
You want to remove that temptation or ability, you want that
exactly.
gone.
I want the temptation gone, right?
Yeah.
I don't want the ability to, we have all these. I feel sort of obligated
what's
to
that
say
block?
We have these incredible policies of if you were to read some user's graph, you're done. You're but I don't want that temptation to exist.
You don't want it to be possible.
I don't want it to be possible for one of my engineers to get kidnapped by some state and have their toenails pulled out until they get some passcode that allows even if I feel like I can trust the people I've hired, I don't want to have a risk of somebody coercing them into doing something that we're dangerous. And that's where you want the technological solution to eliminate. Sometimes you want choice and you want humans in the center of the system, and sometimes you want to remove choice because that way there's this saying that mankind progresses based on the number of things we don't have to think about, which is I have a lot of contradictory beliefs that I think are both. You don't want to hand it over. You don't want Disneyland without no children. You don't want a world where it's just algorithms building things for algorithms, and humans are just puppets in the midst of the being fed fast food or whatever.
Yeah. You don't want to live in WALL-E or whatever that movie is.
Yeah.
I think going back to the money thing, when it was fascinating to me when I got to the point where I bought my first house, right? Because that felt like, I followed the same trajectory, right? When I was working in college, I was working full time and I'd make $800 a month. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can do whatever I want with this. I can buy a car, and with that car I can drive
you didn't
places
even have beer that you had to spend money on. Think about the amount of limitless opportunity for you because you had limitations. I just spent my money on beer.
No, I was pure frozen burritos, baby. That was it.
Yeah.
Then and then you make $40,000 a year and you're like, oh wow, I can get a car that actually runs, and I can have an apartment, and I can buy the more expensive orange juice on a special occasion. It's funny. My wife used to drink orange juice. I can't even imagine drinking orange juice now. Anyway, but now it's so I bought my first house a couple years ago, right? And it felt like the biggest luxury spending. It wasn't an expensive house. It was, size of a down payment relative to Bay Area houses.
Yeah.
But the really crazy thing about it was that a year later we ended up in a weird scenario where we sold that house and I made money, right? And so you cross a threshold at which the things that you buy you don't actually lose money on.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you're middle to low income, everything that you touch is a depreciating asset, right?
Yeah.
You buy food, you buy clothes, it's all going to zero.
Eventually,
and it's just a matter of how long it takes for it to get to zero. And cars, and really a house is the first time that you experience that. And then when I started investing in startups, it was I treated it like it was this gluttonous, luxurious, I just, I think it would be really cool to own shares in this company because I think the founder's really cool.
Yep.
And then,
thanks.
But then the value grows and
Yeah.
you're oh, this is such a different world. But I think it's also one of those things that it's so difficult to empathize with until you've experienced it. That, you know, when I'm talking to Bloom Tech students now, and it's like, you know, going from making $25K a year to making $80K a year is just so massively different that I don't even know how to describe it to people or to explain it to people.
Yeah.
And then when I talk to VCs, some are like, yeah, 85K, like, you know, I guess their life changes a little bit, 25 to 85K. You're like, no, that's like, that's everything. Yeah. You know, that's like, I can't provide for myself, so I can provide for my family comfortably, and I'm going up from there. Yep. So I think that, like, and somebody was doing the math on, you know, I was in a, you know, Signal chat that was looking at like Jack Dorsey's donations to, you know, his net worth is like 12 billion, and he's throwing, you know, 3 million there, 5 million there. And
it's so hard to give money away.
Oh, so hard. And we're joking because
because you're used to being effective with it, and you don't want to just.
There are a few donations that were like 50,000, and we were laughing about, like, you know, how would it feel to be the $50,000 donation from Jack Dorsey?
Amazing. No, like, seriously, because Rome was. Actually, could I grab one of those? Thanks. I'm thirsty.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, my first company, I started with 10 grand that I won in a business plan competition, and I think that money came from like Raytheon and like, you know, a bunch of other companies had put some money into UMass to run this, and we took third prize for my first company, right? And that was the difference between I'm going to go work construction this summer versus I can actually start this as a company and hire someone. Yeah. And like, actually, because, you know, with the first company, I couldn't find anyone who wanted to work for sweat equity. So I had to pay for everything, and it was completely life-changing, you know. And then that company we had a small exit, and I was able to pay off student loans and help my brother and family, and that was great. But then I spent that money down to nothing, and got another 10K investment when I'd spent down to nothing, but had built the first prototype, and I was able to get 10K that kept me from having to go get another job. Yeah. And then
so that's a binary move for you, right?
It was
that's like
completely life-changing. 10K each time was completely life-changing. And like if you can do that a number of times.
I mean, we've had Bloom Tech students who someone has like paid part of their rent, you know, $400 or $500, and that's the difference between like, I'm a software engineer making 85K, or I'm waiting tables, right?
Yep. Or I'm doing something I don't really believe in versus I'm feeling like I have the chance to go pursue my life's work. And it's not going to be enough to just give somebody 10K. Like, all right, so on this money discussion,
compare that to how you think about 10K
to Fiddler
now.
on the Roof.
Okay.
Right? And because, all right, so, you know, like, if I were a rich man, like, my favorite thing about this is the end of it, because he says, and I would have the time that I lack to sit in the synagogue and pray, and maybe have a seat by the eastern wall, and I'd discuss the learned books with the holy men 7 hours every day, and that would be the greatest gift of all. I'm like, what is podcasting but a bunch of men with small fortunes discussing the holy books, right? And like, there's another section where I was just thinking about, this is what VCs want. It's like, you know, like, what is it? He says, he basically is talking about how everyone would come to him for advice. Pardon me, Reptavia, if you please, Reptavia, posing problems that would cross a rabbi's eyes. And then he's like, and it wouldn't make one bit of difference whether I answered right or wrong.
Right.
When you're rich, they think you really know. And it's like, that's why people want to go be a partner at Sequoia.
I mean, believe me, as an investor, like, the crazy thing about
People ask you for advice on things you have no idea about, and
Well,
whatever you say, they're gonna.
Well, it's like, and I'm deciding if I want to say this or not. Okay, I will, because I don't care anymore. Which we can talk about the meaningfulness of not having to worry about if you'll get fired.
Yeah.
Like in discourse and Twitter and like, yeah, we didn't talk about Jack going. Anyway, so, you know, I don't have a big fund by any stretch,
Yeah.
right? But today I had, you know, one company that I invested in was like, hey, you know, what we're working on isn't going to work. And it was like this super heartfelt, thoughtful, apologetic, you know, I'd only put like 5 or 10K
Yeah.
from a fund into this company, not even of, you know, my money of, you know, of $1 million, $2 million, you know, quarterly fund.
Yeah.
And they were like so sincere and so careful, and they were like being such good stewards of that capital, and, you know, they're pivoting, and I was like, great, go for it. Right. And, you know, in the same day I had another company that's like, hey, we just raised at like a 20x valuation versus what you invested in. And, you know, that investment offsets, if that other company were to go to zero, it doesn't matter for me.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So there are a few things that I underestimated until I started investing. And I'm not like a real investor with a real fund with like,
No, you're just
I
getting
mean,
into all
I do
the
have a real
deals everybody
fund. Like
wants to
there
get
is real
into.
money
Yeah.
involved, but I'm not Sequoia by any stretch. Right. But I underestimated how strong portfolio theory is, to where like my incentives are actually to have a few big wins and everybody else. Like, I think there was this, when I was an early stage founder, there was always in the back of my mind was like, not always, but like, are, you know, the people that, how disappointed in me are they right now? Like, how proud of me are they? Like, am I doing the right thing? And like, I learned over time that they think about me far, far less than I thought they did, right? Like, for, you know, for many of them, and anyway, it's not true for everybody, but there's some that like, they literally forgot they invested, and, you know, happy to be along for the ride, and like, you know, good luck.
Yeah.
And net, I assume that all of my startup investments will work out. But as, you know, when you're the founder, when you're the CEO, you feel the weight of the entire company, the entire world, all of your investors, and like,
Well, because there's also a difference, right? This is one of those, to who has much, more will be given. To who has little, even that will be taken from them. Like,
Oof.
not everyone is playing in portfolio theory. Like, the people who are at your company only have the capital that is their talent and their time.
Right.
And, you know, and you are putting your life, you know, your like years or decades of your life into a thesis that only works if you are right against the majority.
Yeah.
Right. Only if you are right about something where everyone else in the world is wrong, like, then you can create a bunch of new value. And you don't have a portfolio to you know,
fall back on.
Right. And
It's
the people who
fully
are
binary.
and the people who are working at your company don't have a portfolio to fall back on. So the weight is the weight of the lack of optionality. It's like the investors this is part of the, you know, the reason I didn't want Rum to be, we raised far less money than we could have at every stage of it.
Oh, for sure. I'd give you more money right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want the people that I was working for to be, you know, folks that it is one bet of many.
One stock in a portfolio of 1,000.
Yeah.
And
but, you know, there's all sorts of
there's so
stuff
many
there.
different tangents I could go on in this, but like, I think I underestimated the extent to which, like, as a founder, like, it's you at the end of the day, right? There's no, you can go to investors for advice. And when people come to me for advice, I feel weird about it, right? It's like, okay, I have seen this before. I've seen a lot of other companies, but like, I don't understand the first thing about your company. I don't like the specific needs that you have. I mean,
well, this is the thing I was thinking about when I was watching this Fiddler on the Roof, right? Is the difference in perception, because I feel like I work harder than I've ever worked, and it's like, but it's also it's definitely a very different kind of work than when I would wake up at 4 a.m. and then hop in the back of a van to drive across state lines to go lay industrial flooring with a bunch of chemicals. And it's a very different kind of work. And it is closer to yabba dibba dubba dum. Like, I do get to discuss the holy books with the learned men.
Sure.
And yeah, the question of what you're working hard for also changes, though, right? So, anyways, but I was particularly thinking about this versus Gwen Stefani's "If I Were a Rich Girl," and I was like, man, I was just longing for Anatevka, because this guy's desire to be rich was the sweetest thing of all, was to be able to seek wisdom and have a deeper relationship with God, and like that was what he told himself was the motivation for why he wished he had a small fortune. Versus Gwen Stefani doesn't actually even want anything in that song. She's like, if I were a rich girl, I would have all the money in the world. Like that's like, it's a tautology. I'm like, also your definition of rich is actually so covetous that you don't want a small fortune so that you can have a yard filled with turkeys and geese, right? You want all of the money. Yeah. Which is, if it sort of says something about the cultural change of like,
well, because you can look at it as like abundance and prosperity too, right? Like,
well, I don't know, because I don't think there's abundance and prosperity when Gwen Stefani is saying, if I were a rich girl. She's very rich. She's extremely rich, right? And
that's what I'm saying.
I think a lot about like
she has abundance,
you can only serve two
right?
servants, God or money.
Okay.
Right? Like this is another Bible quote, and like money can be a tool, or it can be an ends and a means in and of itself. And I think, just like I think, Naval said it, like the reward for fame is being on stage. The cost of fame is never being able to get off of it, right? There is something where when you have an audience, when you have people paying attention to you, you have a point of leverage. You have the ability to, people are looking to you for what to attend to. And so that gives you, influence is not like, influence isn't just, are you going to hype up 8 Sleep and get more people, like, but influence is, like, you can, if you think there is something worth attending to, you can bring other people's attention to it. You have more responsibility for that, because if you're having them all attend to something that is net destructive to the world, and you can, and that's the weight that you're feeling. Right? The weight that you're feeling when you're talking about how, as a founder, you felt so much weight. You have the weight of, because it's not just your life you're making decisions about. No,
it's the hundreds of people that work for me, and it's
a lot. If it's
and it's the
couple people that work for you, still feels like a lot.
It's the thousands of the thousands of students we've had, and the thousands of like it's, and
that's weight.
Oh my gosh! I mean, there was a time when, when I'd be recruiting and people would be like, the level of impact that, Bloom Tech is, or they at the time would say Lambda School is having, is just like so cool, right? I used to work at like an ad tech company, and it just didn't feel very meaningful.
It's like the greatest minds of my generation.
They're all optimizing clicks. But I was like, it's both I had to like warn people that like it is the best thing in the world, And it is the absolute freaking worst thing in the world. Because, like, I mean, I'm now, I promised myself that this would never happen, but I'm fully desensitized to someone going from minimum wage to $100,000 a year. And they can, like, be telling me all about their family and how it changes everything. And, like, I've been so inundated with that I don't feel anything anymore. And then the flip side of that is, like, if someone puts all of their...
Maybe we should just have you break rocks in the yard for a few days to get, like...
Oh, man.
You know, or, like maybe you need to take a vacation that's, like, going and working in a warehouse.
No,
just to resensitize yourself to this.
I legitimately told my wife, this is, like, last year, like, I'm just going to go work at McDonald's for a week. Or, like, I'm going to go drive Uber. Just because, like... It's not like, I don't think it's, you know, money that has desensitized me. It's just like I've been swimming in that for so long. But anyway, the point I was going to make before was someone come in and be like, the level of impact we have is so awesome. And I'd be like, yeah, it's great until you're up at night thinking like, oh, I wonder if there's something, you know, it's 2 a.m. If I worked a little bit harder, could I get so-and-so hired? And, you know, they're not hired right now. And, you know, if I make the wrong decision here, you know, what are the second and third order effects that has? I mean, you know, like we've done layoffs before, right? I've like eliminated the jobs of 50 people at a time, and that sucks. And at the same time, I know that I have to do that in order to have a shot at changing the lives of millions and millions of people. And, you know, the thing that makes me sleep a little bit better at night is those people are like, I mean, everybody that we've ever laid off has had a job instantly, right? Whereas if the vision of Bloom Tech dies, you know, there are millions of people who could have a dramatic life-changing experience that won't, right? Yep. So, like, and that, you know, kind of wraps back around to, like, I have to be super careful about thinking, you know, the end justifies the means. Or,
because that's how you can get the, like, prison camps and the...
Right, because the vision is so compelling, and it's more compelling to me than to anybody else in the world by, like, 100x. You know, and I can only imagine how some folks feel that, like, our orders and order, you know, I'm, like, in the scheme of things... what I've done in my life rounds to zero so fast that, you know, 99.9999999% of people have never, you know, heard of us or care, and it doesn't matter. All
right, this gets to... Okay. I'm gonna go theological for a second here.
All right.
Right? Because... So you were talking earlier about the Mormon aspiration to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And... one of the, so Cantor, like I think it's Georg Cantor or George Cantor, was the mathematician who was working on trans-infinite set theory, and like the question of like, are some infinities greater than others? And yes, and he ended up in a sanatorium, like losing his mind because he was wrestling with God in the math that he was doing, and thinking about. But there's something, I think, beautiful about the idea that there's, if you are comparing yourself to some, perfection is an infinite series, right? And in some way, you know, if we're just going with natural numbers of like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And you're at like 5 billion, you know, and I'm at 2. You're further along the series than I am, but we're both equally
infinitely far away
from the end.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there's there's something that for me is like religious about that, where it's like perfection is not something you're ever going to achieve. You can keep moving along the path, but if you're spending all your time thinking about, okay, I'm at 400,522 and this person's at 300,876, so look how much better I am than them. Like, you're completely missing the point.
Oh yeah,
right?
no,
like,
it doesn't.
Yeah. So I don't know, the rounds to zero thing of like, it's like, you know, in 1,000 years we're all dust.
It'll
and
always
faded
round to
memories.
zero
Yeah,
anyway.
it's like
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how much more work you do, you're still going to round to zero. But the question is, are you able to like? Because the flip side of this is, I have felt like I've been going through, you know, a lot, especially in the last few weeks, but like the last year, and part of it is that there was on this collective intelligence thing. You know, my path was always build a medium that allows me to express thought in a certain kind of way, and build a system where like, okay, we can make a sustainable business with that, so we can bring in people who are smarter than me in various domains, and we can figure out how to do sense making together, and then we can do the real challenge, which is trying to build this way for people to think better together. And you know, for a long time I felt like I was kicking the can down the curb, where there were like hard design challenges and hard technical challenges and hard, like, how do you build that kind of culture? How do you actually do this reasoning? And I was like, well, I have enough money in the bank for me and my co-founder to live for 3 months. So I need to worry about how to make sure that within 3 months
I need
we
to buy
have
3
enough.
more months.
I need to buy 3 more months.
100%.
Right? Or I just need to make sure that we can get to a place where the company's profitable, and so then we can set this up. Or I need to hire this person or that person. And there is some, like, I was so inspired by Tyson Fury recently, the world heavyweight champion, the Gypsy King, because he was talking about basically after he won the world heavyweight championship, he just ended up with these 3 worst years of his life where he was overcome with depression and anxiety and guilt, and he was, you know, 400 pounds and doing cocaine every day and drinking every day, and had, you know, lost the will to live in a bunch of ways. And there is something where achieving some goal that you've had that has been the thing which you've been orienting your life towards, and getting to some place of stability suddenly opens you up to a much larger field of chaos, where there were things that were happening in your life you didn't have the attention to give them. There were problems you couldn't even see because your adrenaline was pumping to just make sure that your survival instincts were, I've got to do this, and I'm going to put my blinders on and shut everything else out. And, you know, it can get overwhelming to succeed on one domain and then see all these other places where you're like, wow, I'm really not succeeding here. I'm like, you know, like, what's happened in my relationship with God? What's happened in my relationship with myself, with my family, with these, and like, or in my case, it's like, wow, here's all these problems that I've felt I have some, you know, oh, as soon as we can knock these out, I'll be able to focus on these. And you're like, wow, actually these problems are harder than I had imagined. Like, there was a reason that I didn't want to work on those before, is like, those are, and you know, now I've spent 10 years of my life, and I'm finally in a position where I've like reached some boss in this level, and I finally get the chance to fight this boss, and like, whoa, like, am I strong enough for this one now? Like,
right.
It's like, it took me 10 years to get to the place to fight this thing. And then you're worried whether you've got it. And then you've got to go back to square one, in a sense of like building yourself, you know.
Yeah, it's funny
finding the path forward there.
For a long time in the early days, a lot of my motivation was, I want to get to a point where I know personally I'm not going to have to go back to a job that I hate again, right? And like, for me, there was like a dramatic mental shift when, like, I mean, some startup investments that I'd made went really, really well. So some other stuff happened, and it's like, I know that I'm not going to have to go back to a job ever again, right? And then all that's left, right? Like, so, you know, I had a conversation with one of our bigger investors that was like, you know, we've had acquisition offers before. We've, you know, all this stuff. Is this what you want to be doing with your life, right? Like, are you sure? And then in the hard times, like, what happens if, you know, let's imagine a scenario where there's no revenue coming in ever again.
GPT-3 actually solves the engineering problem and no one needs to get trained as an engineer.
Or
some crazy,
say, I can't even imagine a scenario where we'd actually have no revenue coming in. But like, say as an example, I can't even imagine. It's like farcical. But like what if you had to, lay off everybody other than you? Like, there's no more money in the bank. What would you do? And I was like, I just keep going, right? Like there's not, there's certainly ways you can run out of money such that like you have to declare bankruptcy in a worst case scenario. But like I reached the point at which I can do whatever I want to do with my time.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that I want to do. And now all that matters is, can I be successful at that? And I don't have like that nagging, like, oh, and by the way, if you, at the end of this runway, you could go back to another job, or you could, pull out your resume again. Like even with that gone, like it doesn't change much. Like it changes a lot and it changes nothing at the same time. Like it changes, okay, I know that like this is what I'm doing. And I know like I have these crazily ambitious plans, and most people think I'm crazy, and I don't care. You have to reach that point where, and I think that was the hardest thing for me to develop as a CEO, like where I could look everybody that I trust in the eye, and as long as I had done my own analysis and believe that that's where I wanted to go, that's where I'm going to go. And I don't have to seek any external validation for that, and I don't have to have anybody's permission for that.
I mean, I think that comes along with all that weight too, though, that you were talking about earlier.
100%.
Because then it's like, well, if you're going to make the decision without, you
bear the responsibility.
Now, the other challenge you got there. So this is like one of the things I've been reflecting on a bunch is like what so I like the idea of the flood myth, you know, right? Of, okay, well, when the flood comes, did you build your levees for 100-year flood, and did you divert a bunch of resources into, like corruption and lining your own pocket, or like are you ready for like the 1,000-year flood, or the like will your levees stand when like the rain comes? And the idea that that's what the flood myth is really about. And one of the things I've been so there's this sense that your systems aren't stable if you are willfully blind to the places where you might be wrong. And so one of the challenges that I have, or I want to say it is like one of the mistakes, or one of the sort of like things I've struggled with in the last year is I had this vision of, okay, we'll build a great note-taking tool, basically. And then we're going to try to figure out a system for building a collective intelligence on top of this new medium that takes advantages of the affordances of the medium, that lets us do these things you can't do in Google Docs or in Notion or in, Jira or whatever. And we're going to, the same way that I had built Rome based on my own, insufficiencies as a person with really bad ADHD, I was living in the product and sort of iterating on, okay, well, what can I do now? What do I need the tool to be able to do so I can do this next thing? And I had this sort of tight feedback loop with myself, and that got us one place, right? Suddenly I try to hire a ton of people and build a system that is both a culture and a set of habits and ways that we're running the company and we're doing all this. But the thing I was telling folks is I was like, listen, we're profitable now. We don't actually care about we need to focus on, are we able to think well together? Are we able to communicate well? Are we able to integrate new people into our ability to think as a system? And we're just going to focus on that. And I don't care if the metrics go, but I don't care if they go up or down, right? Mm-hmm. And what I hadn't realized was that living that way where I'm not being metrics driven. You know, we'd been very like, okay, are we going to grow 10% week over week? Or can we hold that? If we can hold that, then look at this Excel chart. Like we will be able to reach this profitability goal, right? And we'll be able to hire the people that we want to hire. And pulling that away, folks who spent their whole life in, you know, these like school, the teacher, it matters what the teacher's the one grading your test, right? And you know, there's like internal politics in all these places, and it's like, well, really what matters is, does the boss like what you're doing? And I was trying to build a culture where we're all looking at the ground reality of how well are we thinking together. And I might have been thinking about this problem for a lot longer. I might have some ways of seeing that are different from folks who've never worked on it before, but like I want other people to help me perceive reality. Like I don't care necessarily like that this person's making a bunch of noise on Twitter and causing some chaos, and like, or this person is like we have a lot of things that we need to balance. But the thing that I found is a bunch of people who I'd hired were like, they thought that their job was to make me happy as opposed to like challenge or like see a reality like that. And my actions were doing something different than my words were. Right. And that was cause there's this, I've only heard summaries of it from Twitter, but I've heard a lot of really good things about this book called The Guru Papers, which is an analysis of actual cults. And one of the things they talk about is when the leader is the one who's sort of setting the frame through which all meaning is coming in, right? The leader becomes blind to problems in the organization or problems in the community or the culture, because people are so attached to the opinion of like, they basically don't want to be the bearer of bad news.
Right.
And that's a really like, you don't want to be cutting your eyes out when
Right.
you know,
You
like,
create intentional deception within the culture.
And so there's something where it's like, you know, you need to have the self-trust, and you need to say, I'm not doing this. I'm doing this for the goal, and I don't care about external validation or whether this makes me popular. Like, there is something like powerful about, I'm not going to be allowing myself to be driven by the news cycle or like the, you know, how many likes are happening. And there's something that allows you to orient towards a higher good when you're doing that. But there's also a risk that people will then just orient to you.
Yes.
And then you're blinding yourself, and then you end up like, what have I done? what like how, you know, in your, yeah. So yeah, where we're like, this is
I've actually got to take off in a bit.
Yeah. We'll see if there's a thread line through this that's worth running with, but like,
I just got a notification that my heart rate is too high for sitting like I am.
Oh, really? Good.
It's a good conversation.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So in summary, Elizabeth Holmes has a wolf dog.
Shit, it was actually a husky.
Yeah. And those reporters didn't
care
about the nuance that it is.
That's the
partially
thing. It's like
wolf.
you don't, if you're willfully blind to something because it supports your frame and your narrative, you know, you're welcome. You're beckoning chaos.
I think we came full circle in some ways. Not really, but we'll say we did.
You can be unintentionally willfully blind.
There we go.
Right, and the challenge is how to not do that. How do you like? I don't know. How do you do that? How do you not know? How do you stay curious? So like, all right, here's my closing point with this, because it relates to your like challenge as a founder who cares about the thing that you're trying to solve, right? Is would you there's this Jungian idea that, you know, in terms of like stages of development of parts of yourself, you go from being a fool, because whenever you're doing something you don't know how to do, you're a fool, or, you know, the fool can sort of graduate to the savior, but you have a risk of becoming the tyrannical king, right? And the tyrannical king is able to say, like, and this is maybe a risk for any intellectual person, right? Is that you have this theory of the world that is so locked in, and it can become locked in because you're spending all this time fighting the external world, right? Like Mormons have a whole culture they've got to fight. You know, it's not that you're living in an a-religious world. You're living in a world where everything is trying to sell you sex and immediate satisfaction and money and power, and like, you know, there is a like subtle religion of advertising that you're trying to resist. And so you can shield yourself against that by becoming so much more confident in your frame on how the world actually is, that you're not able to see, you're turning a blind eye to the places where your models are wrong, and then you're so locked in, and you're would you rather be right or would you rather be learning, you know? And can you maintain curiosity even when there's a bunch of things which are not good or not true that are sort of barreling down on you and trying to sort of distort your world, you know, or your worldview? Can you still allow whatever truth is in the, can you hear the love that is in the hater, right? Because you and me both get a ton of haters.
Yeah.
And I think
I think to a person, well, not all of them.
The hate that stings the most
well-meaning
is when there's an aspect of truth in whatever the hater's talking about, and you're like, yeah, that's true, but you don't get the whole picture of how it fits together, and then you can.
I mean, there generally is, right? Like I don't know if there's anybody that's like just making stuff up that's completely fake, right? Yeah. They're looking at things from a different angle, or in some cases they may be trying to take things out of context, but like I get it, you know, like or you know, they have a different goal than I do of what the ideal world looks like. Yeah. And for a lot of people, the ideal world looks like the thing that I'm trying to build not existing, because that encumbers the thing that they really wish existed. So, you know, my very existence means the existence of their fully automated luxury gay space communism is less likely, right? Anyway, it's really good closing statement.
Yeah. Would you rather be right or would you rather be learning?
Learning.